Well, it's absolutely fantastic to be part of the conference over the last couple of days and to follow Adam, one of our other clients in HSC, and sort of see some of the advances they're making in terms of culture and fatigue. So the question on what do we need from safety leaders, what's the next generation of development for safety leaders, is something I'd like to share with you. I'd like you to sort of pose this question in three dimensions. First dimension is that you would actually, and many people would say, that all leaders are safety leaders. It doesn't matter what your role is, and in fact, all individuals in an organisation should be a safety leader. Many of you would agree with that, I would imagine, that everybody can be a safety leader. The second distinction is really about those in role. Those who are team leader, supervisor, superintendent, manager, general manager, they have responsibilities as safety leaders. And then the third distinction is actually around the safety professionals. And what is their role as safety leaders? And how do the safety professionals conduct themselves and operate? So if you think about the first distinction was around everybody being a safety leader. And typically we'd be seeking people who are genuinely committed to looking out for each other. They actually are competent and they care. They focus in on the technical task and how they work with others. And if you're saying everybody's a safety leader, they would speak up, they would have courage, they would show that distinction, and they would actually work hard to actually support each other to do the job at hand. There's some of the things that we find, and we work through that. We also know that in Australian culture, and it was highlighted just by the last presentation for the team looking at the micro-sleeps and fatigue, is that people don't speak up. And so in Australian culture, that is still a challenge to overcome. And it's something that actually takes time to support an environment where that would shift. If you go to the second one, though, it's around operational leaders, that group of people, team leader, supervisor, superintendent. And you say, well, how do you actually support them? So we've got some articles around this on our website, but it's around the best safety leaders I know and what do they do. And there's a whole range of distinctions that we can't go into today, but picking a few is around well-designed work, that they plan and execute well-designed work. They actually have a focus on really executing well. And it's a key distinction we find at the front end of all the planning processes. They actually care, which we've touched on a little already. They are focused on engagement and influence in a way to actually support people in a meaningful way, to actually influence them, to actually shift behaviour and shift their focus. And the other one is around culture, and it's around microcultures particularly. So we often say we want to shift organisational culture, and I've certainly been party to a lot of those sorts of strategies, but it's actually microculture, shift by shift, team by team, leader by leader, location by location, actually has so much more power, but it takes more effort. And it takes people who are thinking constructively and effectively about how to shift and operate those parts of the organisation. So microcultures for me are far more important than just overall culture in terms of supporting people to be visible and focus. And then the last one is around courage to act. So the courage to speak up, the courage to act, it was mentioned in 2 other sessions today in the other rooms that I was a part of, and it certainly sits with us, that those operational leaders who would be prepared to challenge. If I flick to the third distinction, it was actually about functional safety leaders. So those who are safety professionals. And as many of you may know, there's quite a lot of work being done, and it was released last year in terms of the professional capability framework. And there's some incredibly useful documentation there. It's quite weighty, but very useful, distinguishing between an occ health and safety professional and a practitioner. And again, for the safety teams that we work with, I go back 10 years ago, we used to run sessions for safety professionals called From Cop to Coach. It was how to actually shift from being that disciplinarian to coaching. It's gone a lot further than that now, and actually is a lot more sophisticated around systems thinking. So your safety professionals, are they systems thinkers, not systems implementers or enhancers? Do they actually challenge the safety systems that you have, and can they bring systems thinking in a coherent way? That they drive cultural change. They understand risk and critical controls at an effective level, not just at a superficial level. So VUCA is something that's been used by the US military as a framework for understanding and analysing the complex world that we're in. But we're using it from an organisational cultural perspective. So that volatility, which we saw this morning when we all got our alerts to say there was a challenge underway and we might have had our 5th Prime Minister, or was it our 6th? I always forget. Uncertainty, complex and ambiguous. And so as the world keeps changing, so do our operations and so do our teams. Organisationally, there's matrix organisations, more networks, more deliverables, and how to navigate the organisation is becoming more challenging for people. How do you simplify it? How do you create a culture where people can cut through and get things done? If it takes 2 years to initiate an internal project in your business, chances are the technology that you might be implementing is already gone. So how do you actually change that up to make it faster? And of course, resourcing is always something to focus on. The guys over here did a great job in talking about technology and some great video from Kat in terms of AI, augmented reality, virtual reality. These actually processes are coming into businesses more quickly, more effectively, and starting to make a big change. So how do we actually get safety leaders to be effective? So if I just bring those 4 themes together, the 4 faces of future safety leaders. So in the VUCA area, it's how do we have people who are more adaptive as leaders? This adaptive approach with resilience and great leadership. When you actually go to the organisational side, it's around being a relationship manager and how do people actually change the way that they work effectively inside the organisation. If you look at resourcing and planning and execution, project management is still a key. And then as you go to the last one around technology, it's really around this design thinking. We know that work is changing. We know that industry is changing and society is changing. So these future capabilities actually are somewhat harder to define. It's not the core competencies we're after, it's actually the capabilities that will take people beyond in terms of their safety leadership. I'm pulling apart the competency work from this morning to this afternoon. These future capabilities actually make such a big difference in terms of the way people bring the organisation together. Learning on the job will just not get you there. It's actually how do you accelerate that learning? How do you actually move faster in the organisation? And seeking out experts, role models and networks to learn from. It's just amazing that so many times now, whenever we're working with young people, the first thing you go, how do you do this? Where do they go to? They don't do a Google search. What do they search on? YouTube. It's the only search tool they use. It's like, if I want to know how to do it, I'll want to see a video. How are we actually sort of adapting? It's their core search tool. And the last one is just around personal development. So what's your personal development plan to actually lift safety leadership in your business for yourself, for your team and for others? Thank you very much, and I hope there's a few thought provokers for you in that.